am Jalen Arnold, and welcome to Hometown Heroes, a new feature here at PCTV. Today, we welcome a member of the PCHS class of 1985, Major General John Epperly. Let me be clear before I begin his introduction, General Epperly has accomplished a very large amount since leaving Pulaski County. General Epperly is a two-star general, and since November of 2023, has served as the Special Assistant to the Director, Army National Guard for the Army Reserve Forces Policy Committee in Arlington, Virginia. He is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point with a bachelor's in international relations. Drexel University, where he earned an MBA in finance, and the United States Army War College, where he earned an MSS in strategic studies. His military schools include the Army Officer Basic Course, Scout Platoon Leader Course, Infantry Mortar Leader Course, Army Officer Advanced Course, the Combined Arms and Services Staff School, the United States Command and General Staff College, United States Army War College, the Army Senior Leader Development Program, the Deputy Commanding General Course, Joint Task Force Commanders Course, the National Strategic Education Program, Aviation Senior Leader Course, and the General and Flag Officer Homeland Security Executive Seminar. He has served in many capacities throughout his career, in addition to his most recent posting, including time as a tank platoon leader, mortar platoon leader, executive officer, and S4 at Fort Knox, Kentucky, an ROTC Detachment Assistant Professor of Military Science at Drexel University, various leadership and staff assignments with the 29th Infantry Division of the Virginia National Guard, Commander of the Joint National Guard Augmentation Element at Norfolk, Virginia, Commander of the 116th Infantry, 29th Infantry Division during Operation Iraqi Freedom with time spent in and around Kuwait, Iraq, and other locations in the Middle East. Deputy Commanding General of Operations with the 29th Infantry Division from Fort Belvoir as a part of Operation Spartan Shield, Camp Afjan, Kuwait, Commanding General of the 29th Infantry Division at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and as the Commanding General of the Army National Guard, U.S. Army Futures Command in Austin, Texas. His awards and decorations include the Army Distinguished Service Medal with 1 Bronze Oak Leaf Cluster, the Legion of Merit with 1 Bronze Oak Leaf Cluster, the Bronze Star Medal, Meritorious Service Medal with 2 Bronze Oak Leaf Clusters, the Joint Services Commendation Medal, the Army Commendation Medal with 3 Bronze Oak Leaf Clusters, Army Achievement Medal with 1 Bronze Oak Leaf Cluster, the Army Superior Unit Award, Army Reserve Components Achievement Medal with 4 Bronze Oak Leaf Clusters, National Defense Service Medal with 1 Bronze Service Star, the Global War of Terror Service Medal, the Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal, Armed Forces Reserve Medal with Silver Hourglass Device and M Device, Army Service Ribbon, Overseas Service Ribbon with numeral 2, the Virginia Governor's National Service Medal, the Virginia National Guard Bronze Star, Virginia National Guard Commendation Medal, the Virginia National Guard Emergency Services Ribbon, Virginia National Guard Perfect Attendance Ribbon, the Mississippi National Guard Emergency Services Ribbon, the Combat Infantryman Badge, the Parachutist Badge, the Air Assault Badge, and the Army Staff Identification Badge. His professional memberships and achievements cover a wide variety of veteran and civilian groups and organizations, including the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the American Legion. He has been inducted into the Pulaski County High School Hall of Fame, and his photo can be found on the wall outside of our main office. General Epperly, thank you for your service and welcome home. I'd like to get right into some questions. First, you've come a long way since you walked the halls of PCHS. What are some of your fondest memories as a Cougar?
Well, thanks, Jalen. It's been a great run. I graduated with the class of '85, and it's now 2025. So 40 years on. I'm actually getting retired this year from the Army after 36 years of commissioned service and 4 years at the Academy. But as far as my fondest memories, there's a lot. There's a lot here. Uh, I got here, I think PCHS was just a little over 10 years old when I got here. I think we were celebrating the 10-year anniversary when I got here. Um, and driving in the day, it's still, there's a lot the same. There's a lot that's changed. Uh, but memories that kind of come to me as I was walking over here to the CT this morning, I remembered the indoor track practices where we used to run the halls at 5:30 in the morning before school, getting ready for meets. Um, walking past the little theater, remember doing programs in there and whatnot, and award ceremonies, and really just had just a wonderful time here. I thought back to all my classmates. We just had our 40-year anniversary or reunion here recently. I couldn't go as unfortunately I was working, but um, saw a lot of my classmates on Facebook. They were doing that, and that brought back a lot of great memories. And honestly, the faculty and staff. You know, nobody has a lot of success in life unless you've got great people around you. And I had an incredible team around me. I still remember this day. A lot of those names come to mind, those faces. John Freeman, John Duncan, Edna Loftus, Aubrey Burnett, just a ton of people. Suzanne Steele come to mind. Miss Skeen, just a great group of people here that really kind of got me on my way. And I can never really thank Pulaski County enough for helping me on my way.
When did you decide to join the military, and what led you to making that decision?
Oh gosh, pretty early in life. I come from a very military family. Matter of fact, we trace our roots back to the Revolutionary War. So my father served in Vietnam. My grandfather was in the Navy in World War II. My great uncles were both in the Marine Corps in World War II. Had a little bit of serendipity. Recently, my youngest son married a young lady who's of Okinawan descent, and his great uncle helped liberate Okinawa from the Japanese back in World War II. So really, it was kind of going on with the family tradition. I was active duty for about 9 years, and when I left active duty, I joined the Virginia Army National Guard, and that was kind of like the family business. So for a very short time here in Southwest Virginia, my father and my brother and I were all in the same battalion. So I remember some of my fondest memories of that were going to the field, and I became the battalion operations officer as a major. My father was the tow platoon sergeant. He didn't have a platoon leader, so I got to maneuver my dad as a major. So, but a lot of really fond memories there. A lot of my classmates from PCHS were in the Army National Guard over the years with me. As a matter of fact, it's funny. There were kids that I grew up down in Fairlawn that we would play war in the backyard together. That we went in the Army together. And there were two identical twins, the McGee brothers. They both actually jumped into Grenada when that happened back in the 80s. And they were there, and I was at West Point at the time. But we all kind of came back together again in the Army National Guard some years later. So PCHS, Southwest Virginia, had been a big part of my life. My parents still live here, but again, I think that in some ways my service was predestined because of what my family had done before me. I felt a great sense to serve. My sons now serve, and again, I didn't really encourage it, but they kind of found their way there. Although one's in the Navy, one's in the Coast Guard. And they're doing great things. So, like I said, it's just been I think a family tradition. And interestingly, we find a lot of that going on in the services today, where a lot of the military's connection is into prior service members and their children that are serving. Um, and one of the things we really encourage is, even if you've never served before, your family doesn't have a tradition of service, you should consider it for a lot of reasons we can talk about. But we do like to kind of open up the population a bit more and have more Americans maybe not make a career of serving the nation, but certainly have that experience, because we find that it's a very formative experience early in your life.
Starting out as a young service member attending West Point, what were some of the challenges you faced? Is West Point as hard as everyone says it is?
Yeah, it is. um, a lot of challenges. So again, I'll kind of tie it back to PCHS. I was not the best math and science student. I really wasn't. I was far more adept at the humanities. I did the forensic competitions, those kind of things, kind of growing up here and whatnot. And all the academies are very heavy STEM. I mean, you've got a lot of math and science there. So matter of fact, funny story, when I was here, I started out in Algebra 1 as a freshman and got like a D the first 9 weeks. I was getting murdered. So my teacher took mercy on me, and they rolled me back to Algebra B Part 1. And I got my footing. And as a sophomore, I took Algebra 1, got A's, and it did great. And then as a junior, I had to take Algebra 2 and Geometry together to kind of catch up. And then I got through Trig, and bless Miss Keensart for getting me through that. But when I got to the academy, we were one of the early classes to actually get scientific calculators that we could actually take into classes and for tests and whatnot. And I'll never forget going in to take the math placement test at West Point. They gave us a calculator, it was an HP scientific calculator that used what I now know as reverse Polish notation. Well, I know what that was. So I go in there and I'm trying to use a calculator to take the test and whatnot, the placement test, and I raise my hand, and this captain comes over, and I said, "Sorry, that my calculator's not working." He goes, "No, you just got to do this here." So it uses reverse Polish notation. Well, I was on my 5th day at the academy. I thought this is just another haze like everything else. Okay, so I took that test with just basically what I could do in my head. And as you can imagine, I got placed pretty low in the math classes. But it took me about a year or so to struggle with it. I got through calculus, but it took a while to learn that. The thing that I remember in that most is that the teachers that taught me how to teach myself some things. At West Point, they have what they call the Thayer method of instruction, or the Thayer method of learning. And the expectation is that you do some things on your own to get ready for class. An example, one of my most challenging teachers here at PCHS was Mr. John Duncan. He taught chemistry and physics to the juniors and the seniors. And to be honest, I didn't like him. He wore me out. I mean, he was a very, very tough teacher. And the thing I didn't like about it was we'd go into class and he'd say, "Who's got questions?" If nobody has any questions, okay, let's say a quiz. So you quickly learn that you better come to class ready to go. I didn't like him for that. I got to West Point and I walked in my 3rd calculus class, and the instructor said, "Hey, who's got questions?" Nobody had any questions. And the reason was not because we were not good students. It's because I was so lost, I didn't know what to ask. His answer was, "Clear and staggered desks, we're taking a quiz." So you rapidly learned, come to class. The expectation was you are responsible for your learning. You're responsible for your development. Okay, nobody else is. Okay, come to class ready to go. Now I look back on that, and as hard as Mr. Duncan was on us, okay, he was probably the best teacher I had for preparedness for college. But you get to West Point, the academics are tough, the athletics are tough, you get the military component. You're carrying usually 20 plus hours most semesters. So I mean, most of my classmates that had gone to other colleges were carrying 15, 16 hours at most. But everybody's doing PE, you're doing military science, and you're doing all your regular courses. And again, for most of those courses, they were all very math science heavy. So it was a very, very rough first year for me. And again, of course, you're being a plebe there and whatnot. There's all the stuff that goes along with that. And if you've ever gone to a military school, it's a similar experience. Whether the service academies, VMI, Virginia Tech, and the Corps, it's a similar experience. The point is that you are deliberately overloaded. And you're overloaded so that you learn how to prioritize the most important things. You also learn the value of a minute. It's amazing what you can get done under time pressure when you have to. And that's part of the education, because one day, God help us, we end up in combat, okay? A lot's going to be expected under serious pressure, time pressure, and to get the decision right. So all those things are designed to kind of form you in that crucible. So on your worst day in the worst place, okay, you're ready to go. Because at that moment in time, you're responsible for America's most precious resource, your young men and women. And we don't let people be even junior officers easily. It is a hard road. It is a long road, but one that's well worth it. And like I said, you asked if it's as hard as they say it is, but it's doable. And I can tell you that I got there were a lot more kids, I think, that were smarter than I was, that were maybe even more active and prepared than I was. But, I had a lot of classmates that came from rural high schools, much like PCHS is, and we all had our gifts too, and we all had our strengths too. So it was a great way to bring a lot of young Americans in from all 54 states and territories, with a common goal of defending the nation, and really kind of going through that crucible, as I indicated, to get ready for that. So yeah, I love my time there. We used to always say it's a great place to be from. It's a tough place to be going to, but very proud of that. And go Army, beat Navy.
After West Point, you began serving in leadership positions on active duty at Fort Knox. Can you tell us about that? What it was like leading young soldiers who weren't much younger than you, leading with and under soldiers who were not much older than you, and how you handled some of those challenges?
Yeah, it's well. First of all, my first job out of the academy was as a tank platoon leader. So I got to Fort Knox. We were the only deployable unit on post. Mostly Fort Knox was is a training installation, but I was in the brigade that was part of the 18th Airborne Corps, and we were their armored punch. So we had a full brigade, armor brigade at Knox, and I was the youngest leader of the smallest element, which was a tank platoon, and it was a great job. It was a great job. I love being a tank platoon leader. Um, Part of that was because I was really blessed. And you mentioned younger folks. Some are young, a lot of them are older. So when you're a second lieutenant, you get a platoon sergeant, a sergeant first class in the Army. And generally speaking, that sergeant first class has been around for between 14 and 17 years. So they've been around. And their job, as much as being a senior leader in that platoon, is also to train the lieutenant coming in. All right. So there, because being a second lieutenant is very much an apprenticeship type role. You're there, but the Army, like the rest of the military, believes in the strategy of learning by doing. So you're there with this platoon sergeant, and I got two great ones in my time as a tank platoon leader. And you're going to learn a ton. You work really hard. I got engaged when I was still at West Point. We didn't get married until I'd been in for a year, which was good because that first year was very, very difficult. I mean, I was there early, there late in the motor pool, making sure the tanks are fixed because things break on them, so you got to fix them. A lot of maintenance. But everything from maintaining M1 to firing an M1 to tactically employing one on the battlefield, all those things you learn very rapidly. Um, and to your point, besides the guys that were older than me, the majority of the platoon was younger than me. I mean, you had everything from first term enlistees that were right out of high school that had gone to basic training, joined the Army. Um, they had come in, and it's funny because I was 22, 23 years old as a platoon leader. And you're considered the old man to a lot of your very young counterparts that have come in, which is kind of crazy when you're 23 years old. Um, but experience is a slippery thing. And I found that my time at the academy had really prepared me well to be a small unit leader. Um, a lot of it, it's like being a big brother in a lot of ways. And I'll tell you, being an officer or an NCO leader in the Army is like being a big brother, big sister. It's also like being a teacher because you're passing on what you've learned to those who are coming behind you. There's always a churn in a military organization with people coming in, people going out, and you're expected to kind of pass on what you've learned. The first thing I learned at West Point with my classmates was cooperate and graduate. You're a unit. You work together. You don't let anybody fall by the wayside. No words. And I'll tell you, I mean, in those times I mentioned academically, um, they never quit on you. If you don't quit on yourself, they won't quit on you. And it was a great experience to know that people were always there for you. And when you get to your unit in the Army, it's the same thing. It's a very, very close bond you have with your fellow soldiers. As a guardsman, I've spent the last almost 30 years in corporate America, and I've got wonderful colleagues in corporate America. Uh, but there's nothing like the military. If you ask anybody that's ever served in the military, when they leave, they'll tell you the one thing they miss the most is the camaraderie, by far. Um, I've worked with people that came from all walks of life, rich, poor, um, all creeds, all races. And I will tell you that the Army, for me, was the great leveling point. It was a meritocracy. It didn't matter who you were, where you came from. I came from a lower middle class family here, excuse me, in Southwest Virginia, and it just didn't matter. All right, what mattered is what could you contribute? How hard were you willing to work? And to a person in my Army journey, those are the people I've worked with. And as a young officer coming out of West Point at Fort Knox, that was emblematic of what I saw in those units. So great units out there, great folks. It was fun kind of being the big brother. It was funny because we would work hard. We'd go, we work out together. We play racquetball together. We have what we call combat sports. We had like a game we played that was a cross between football, rugby, and soccer. The only objective was to get the ball or whatever you were carrying across the goal line, okay, and there were no rules. So it was, um, And that went on until we had a couple guys break a collarbone and break an arm, and we had to stop doing that because they didn't like paying for the medical, I guess. But the point is that it does create a wonderful bond, because and that's the kind of bond you want before you ever, if you have to go to battle someplace, you want to know that you can trust the people that you're with and know that they're going to be there for you again on your worst day in the worst place.
After your time at Fort Knox, you moved into a different type of situation, moving from active duty to the National Guard. What was that transition like, and how did you manage those challenges?
It was a big transition. So I left active duty as a captain. I'd been in for about 9 years on active duty. My last job was actually teaching ROTC at Drexel University up in Philadelphia. So I was in an academic environment when I left. I got my MBA at night there. And I faced a decision point. My wife and I, we had a son, and I was gone a lot. So it was one of those things where, you know, as a husband and father, I had to make a decision. And as much as I love the Army, I felt like, well, you know what, I need to do something for my family here. I've got my MBA now. I think I'm going to try my hand at corporate America. So I left the Army. I resigned my commission, left the Army. I've been out for maybe a couple of months. I came home for Christmas. And my father and brother, who were in the Army National Guard here in Virginia, said, hey, you should join the Guard. You could really offer us. I don't know. I don't really want to do that. I mean, back in those days before the War on Terror, the active duty guys often had a poor view of the folks in the National Guard, which was unfounded, but we did. So, long story short, I said, yeah, I'll give it a whirl. And the other reason I left the Army was I didn't go to Desert Storm. Desert Storm was the last big tank fight of the 20th century, okay, and I missed it as a tank guy. So I'm thinking my career's over with. I'll never be a battalion commander. I'll never get past lieutenant colonel. What's the point? So in addition to my family's needs, I thought career-wise, maybe this might not be the best place for me anymore, so I moved on, not knowing that America's longest war was right around the corner with the War on Terror. So again, sometimes you make big mistakes or you make misassessments of the world, okay, when you've been doing it for a while. I was in my early 30s and probably made a mistake there. In any event, I joined the Army National Guard, and for the first few years, I joined in 97, so this was all pre 9/11. Did several efforts to kind of deal with natural disasters, those kind of things. And then 9/11 happened. And, as a citizen soldier, you're doing a lot of different things. You're now managing two careers. You've got to maintain your proficiency as an Army officer at ever higher levels of responsibility. And I was learning. I mean, I went into telecommunications. I went from tanks to telecom. And the only thing they had in common was they started with a T. So I was on a very steep learning curve with telecommunications. I worked for MCI at the time. And when 9/11 happened, I was in Northern Virginia when the planes came in and hit the Pentagon. I was actually driving in Springfield when that happened. I heard on the radio. Everything changed. And it also changed what it meant to be a citizen soldier, because back in those days when you joined the Guard, hey, I'll go to war, if the Soviets are landing in Virginia Beach, something like that. So they're just very, very rare you would go to war in the National Guard. And then it happened. First time was, I remember I was a major at the time. And I remember going out to Dulles Airport and riding the fence line with the airport authority, talking about how they're going to secure the airports after everything that happened with that. And then you probably don't remember back in those days, before there was a TSA, we had Guard soldiers in airports with weapons, okay, when you went through to check your luggage, you're watching people. And then the TSA about a year and a half later would take over from that, and they would do that mission. And then before I ever went to war, because that would come later in 07, 08, with the Guard, Katrina happened. And it was Labor Day weekend of 2005. And I had just taken command of a battalion, about 800 soldiers, and we got the call that, hey, we need you down in Mississippi as soon as you can get there. And probably the most satisfying mission I've had in all 40 years of service. The people of Mississippi, wonderful people. And I mean, they would give you the shirt off their back, even though they had nothing to give. But we went down there and helped recover that situation. I was down there for about 3 months, and unbelievable total devastation to the Gulf Coast. We had task forces in and around New Orleans and Louisiana, and my task force was working in Gulfport, Mississippi. But we had everything from Pass Christian in the west to Biloxi in the east. So we get to know a lot of the Mississippians down there. Still talk to those folks. A lot of friends down there I made during that time period. And then a couple years after that, we would go back to Mississippi and mobilize at a place called Camp Shelby. So when you're in the Guard, you mobilize onto active duty, that you do some training, and then you go to war. And went back to Mississippi for that, and then would go to Iraq for the first time in combat, 07, 08. So again, my journey in the Army was very different. The one thing I would tell everyone listening, and if you're considering joining the Guard, the National Guard and the Army Reserve are true national treasures. Having worked with militaries all over the world, I can tell you that our reserve components, that is the Guard and Reserve, are as good as or better than most other countries' active militaries. They're outstanding units. And they're staffed by true Americans, true citizens. I mean, these folks all have civilian jobs. They're in school still, because there's a lot of college students that are still in there. They're young enlisted guys usually, or they're cadets. And they are really giving of themselves. I never worked as hard as I've worked in my life being a Guard soldier and an executive in corporate America. They are very, very hard to maintain side by side. Your family sacrifices a lot. There were a lot of years we didn't go on a vacation because I would have my 2 weeks of annual training in the summer, and there just wasn't time away from work to do that again with the family. So, it's not just you sacrificing, it's your family sacrificing. But for me, it worked. And for me, it made a lot of sense. And again, like I said, if you see a Guardsman or Army Reservist out there, or a Navy Reservist, or a Marine Corps Reservist, doesn't matter. Those folks that serve in those reserve components across the military, are doing the Lord's work. They really are. They are working. These are hardworking people. And they do it because they love it. They do it because they love the nation. They believe in the mission. And they said, you know what? It wasn't enough to just be a soldier or be in corporate America. I'm going to do both. And so again, like I said, for those looking at that, it's been the most satisfying thing besides being a husband and father of my life, was to be a citizen soldier. I love being on active duty. Great. I could focus on, I could work out twice a day. It was fantastic. But I've never worked as hard, except being a citizen soldier.
As your career continued, you moved into positions with higher responsibilities and leadership challenges. What parts of your time and experiences as a young officer on active duty and with the National Guard gave you the confidence to take on all of that? Also, what are some of the memories from those earlier times that may have helped you make decisions when it came to leading soldiers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tell you, the confidence to lead is really a cumulative thing. As I indicated, that being a lieutenant is very much an apprenticeship, as it were. But the Army I always thought was very good at imbuing young people with a lot of confidence. I mean, and it starts early on. So everything at West Point, those little victories you would get early on, getting your uniform straight, okay, and finally passing a room inspection, those kind of things, to very high exacting standards. To going to airborne school and jumping out of a plane, or jumping out of a helicopter on a rope, or those kind of things. You learn in conquering your fears. And look, these are scary for everybody. All right. The first time I fired an M1 tank, the whole turret shakes, and as a tank commander, the gun recoils right by your head within 8 inches. Okay, it's recoiled right beside your head. All those things, the cumulative effect, Jalen, I think, is to really build your confidence. And what I've learned is, it's a great question you asked, because that confidence is so foundational to everything you do as a leader. If you lack confidence, it's very, very hard to be an effective leader, because you're always self-doubting. You're wondering, does somebody else doing this better? There's even like a psychological term called imposter syndrome. Okay, that am I right for this job? So I've always liked the Army method of this, of kind of little building blocks along the way that happen over years of service. So as you go from second lieutenant through being a captain, a major, a colonel, and even a general one day, all those things have a cumulative effect, so that the confidence is born of your total body of experience. That, I've seen this before, okay? Or, wow, this is bad, but it wasn't as bad as that time over here, okay? So again, what I just love that about the Army. And I will tell you that the Army is, and the military in general, is very unique in one way. Nobody can afford to subsidize a 22-year-old second lieutenant like the U.S. government can. I mean, at the tender age of 22, I was commanding 4 tanks and 16 soldiers, all right, at 22, all right? most folks who are in entry level job, okay, they're not given that kind of responsibility. By the time I was in my mid 30s, I was leading, a task force of almost 1,000 soldiers. So you get responsibility very young in life in the military, and we see what you can do with it. But again, most folks in their entire lives that don't get the opportunity or the blessing to serve in our military, okay, don't get that opportunity to have that kind of responsibility. Again, it has to be underwritten by somebody. Most companies can't afford it. It's just too risky. We can't afford to give somebody who's grass green, that has no experience, that kind of responsibility. So looking back on it, the confidence that you ask about really, I think, comes from the repetition and the opportunity to actually do those jobs and have that responsibility and get those experiences early in life that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten. I look at my two sons that are serving. My youngest son is 26. He's flying a $160 million aircraft. All right, he's an aircraft commander for a $160 million aircraft. My oldest son is the captain of a Coast Guard cutter in Key West, all right, which is also a very expensive piece of equipment with a 24-person crew. So again, all young people, all getting an opportunity to lead and do something very consequential in life. So when you have that kind of upbringing, it gives you the ability to kind of go in and make decisions and do the right thing at jobs of increasing responsibility. As a matter of fact, when we promote somebody in the military, we're not promoting on what you've already done. We're promoting you based on your potential for future responsibility and future leadership. So promotions in the military are not a backward-looking thing. They're a forward-looking thing. So that's how we operate, and that's how we do it. So it's a great question you're asking, and it really gets at the very heart of how we select, develop, and select leaders in the U.S. military. And it's a very unique place. The U.S. military in all branches is extremely deliberate and very, very resourceful and puts a lot of their money and time and effort into finding, developing, and selecting leaders. And I've lived that for 40 years. But that's how you get the confidence to make those kind of decisions. Now, look, there's a lot of things that go into it. I mean, again, experience. I mean, my first time in combat, it was the night of October 16th, 2007. These things you don't ever forget. And I was lieutenant colonel, and it all came together in one night southwest of Lake Habbaniyah near Ramadi, Iraq. All that time comes together in that one moment. And I like to think that, the Army got me right. They got me ready for that. But again, it's not just the Army. I mean, I look back on it, it's everything I did from middle school, at Delta Middle School to PCHS. It's that life road that you walk that really gets you ready for that. But for me, that was my journey, and again, a lot of really outstanding people using a lot of really great systems and methodologies, okay, got me ready. The one thing, I'll close with the question's answer with this. The one thing that we don't do in America is we don't send our young people off to war, okay, unless we've prepared them and we've equipped them. All right. Now, we've made that mistake as a nation in the past. There's actually a book out there, one of my favorite books, called America's First Battles. For a good portion of the nation's history, we didn't get that formula right. And we would send Americans into harm's way, okay, unprepared and ill-equipped. We don't do that anymore. We learned some harsh lessons, in many of our wars as recently as Korea, that, there was a Task Force Smith that got overrun by the North Koreans in that war. And, we swore never to let that happen again. So like I said, if you do decide to serve at some point, those that do, we do take care of that resource because it is our most precious resource.
You served in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Spartan Shield in combat. During your time in those areas, what were some of the lessons you learned and some of the memories that you have?
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. My first combat tour was 07, 08. It was during the Iraqi surge campaign. So some folks may remember this. This was when President Bush decided that we were going to really double down and we were going to win the war. So we put a lot more forces on the ground during the surge campaign. It was also a time that we had the Sunni awakening. So you had, if you understand anything about Islam, there's two primary sects, there's Shia and Sunni. A lot of mischief was being made by Iranian Shia militia groups in Iraq at the time, and that was causing a lot of the problems. And frankly, the Iraqis, the Sunnis woke up to that. So the Sunni awakening. All that was the backdrop of my first combat tour. So I got into Iraq in September of '07. I would be there until the following summer of '08 for about a year. We got there. It was chaos. It was very much a very, very shaky situation all over the country. A lot of bad things have been going on. We didn't have enough soldiers when I got there. General Petraeus was the commander at the time, and we got a major infusion, not just U.S. troops, but coalition forces as well. So the first 4 to 6 months were pretty dicey. Back in those days, we didn't have the new MRAPs that could come in and protect us from IEDs and whatnot. They were still kind of flowing in. So we were using older equipment. But what I remember, the first thing I really remember is being at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, getting my infantry soldiers ready to do mounted warfare because we were all light infantry. So we weren't really used to fighting from vehicles. So we had to learn how to do that. Now, I'd been on tanks, so I knew how to do that, and I'd branch transferred to infantry when I joined the Guard, but most of my soldiers had not done that. So it was a very steep learning curve in getting ready for that operation. The other thing I learned is that regardless of what you think of the folks that live in the Middle East, okay, the ones that were fighting against us believed in what they were doing. And I would tell you that there's no more lethal of an enemy, okay, as an enemy that believes in what they're doing. They believed in what they were doing just as strong as we believed in what we were doing, and they were willing to die for it. So when you look at Iraq, Afghanistan, our adversaries there were tough. They were determined. They were willing to fight, and in many cases, give their lives. So they were a very tough adversary. And again, in their mind, they were fighting for their homes. So regardless of your politics, you have to respect that, and you have to respect who these people were. The third thing I remember is the unbelievable impact of warfare on the civilian populace. It's the most heartbreaking part. I mean, imagine driving around here, in Southwest Virginia, okay, and being worried about there being a roadside bomb. You're just going to get some food, or you're taking your child to the doctor or something like that. It created an insidious fear among the population, okay, that I don't think people ever get over. I mean, we got to come home. We were there for a year or so. We would come home and be replaced by different U.S. forces or coalition forces. They didn't. That was their reality. They lived in that. So, and watching that kind of happen, I mean, you as a human being, you can't help but have, feelings of just depression and remorse for what those people are going through. It's just natural. It's hardest on the most vulnerable, the children, and a lot of the women in that society, okay, really had it hard. I mean, it was very, very, very difficult. And then the other thing I learned was, the unbelievable just courage and valor of the American soldier. I saw some incredible things. I saw other soldiers here from Southwest Virginia do incredibly brave things. One that really comes to mind, and I smile to this day when I think about this. It was a young female medic that we had. She might have been 120 pounds soaking wet. I mean, I think her medic bag weighed as much as she did. And we had an IED strike one day up near Fallujah, and I remember her crawling down a ditch to get to wounded soldiers, and sitting up with green tracers flying right over her head, okay, while she was working with these guys. One of the bravest things I ever saw. So when you look at that and you just see not just the human cost, but the human valor, like I said, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But I will tell you, of all my military decorations I've earned, that you can see my uniform today, the one that means the most to me is my combat infantry badge, because there's only one way to get that. All right. And that's to be, in a place where you could lose your life in a minute. And the last thing I learned is sometimes it doesn't matter how good you are. You can be the best soldier. You can be the most intelligent soldier. The enemy gets a vote, and fate plays its role. All right. So, it's dangerous for everybody. So the folks that have actually gone in and seen those kind of things, I have immense respect for. And I'll tell you what, as tough as the days I had in combat were, okay, I see a Korea vet, I see a World War II vet, and there's very few of those left. I can just about guarantee you they had it way worse than we ever did. So yeah, I mean, I learned a lot of things from that. Took a lot of things from that that I'll never forget, but mostly good. And again, like I said, our Guard and Reserve and Army they truly are a national treasure because of the people that make them up, that are willing to step forward and say, "Send me." So
One of your medals is the Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal. You also have the Virginia National Guard and Mississippi National Guard Emergency Service Medals. Tell us how those came about and what they were for.
yeah, so the Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal, I was a scoutmaster for about 25 years. So in addition to having my civilian job and my guard job and being a husband and father, I was a scoutmaster, and I love that. And the reason I did that was because my time was so pressed. I realized if I become a scout leader, it's a forcing function to make sure I'm spending time with my sons and things I want to do. So because I know that if I need to be there and I want to schedule something, it's going to force me to do it. So I got into that, and we started. My wife actually was a big part of this too. We started 3 different scout units in Northern Virginia, up in Stafford County. So we started 2 Boy Scout troops and a Cub Scout pack. My volunteer work was primarily with the Scouts. Loved doing that. Did that for, gosh, a long time. My first Eagle Scout went to the Air Force Academy and is flying F-22s today. John Schrader, great young man. But I've had, incredibly successful Scouts. I've got chemical engineers, um, doctors, nurses, military officers, civil engineers. I mean, all those kids have done great work. So my one regret there is we don't have enough boys and girls in scouting these days. It's a fantastic program. It really is. It's a great program. What I liked about it is, I mean, I was an athlete in high school, and I have a lot of athletes in scouts as well. But a lot of folks, might not be the best athlete. Okay, but you can still get out, enjoy nature, learn outdoor skills, learn about leadership and character, those kind of things. So I love the fact that Scouts was there for everybody. I had kids that I had a couple scouts that were that had issues with their back and their legs, and they were able to get through the program as well and become Eagle Scouts. So, but that was where my volunteer work mainly went over the last 20, 30 years was scouting. Did a little bit of coaching too, but it was mainly scouting. The emergency service medals were mainly for what the Guard does here at home. So the Mississippi medal was for Katrina, went down there for Hurricane Katrina recovery. And then Virginia actually got that a few times for hurricanes, floods, those kinds of things. Again, the thing about the National Guard that's very unique in the military is that until we're federalized to go to war, we work for the state governor. So today, as a guardsman, my actual commander in chief is Governor Youngkin until I get mobilized when I will work for the president. So that's very unique because the National Guard is the modern embodiment of the old American militia system that would be, run by the state or the territorial governor. And that has survived all the way through to this point in time today. And because of that, you can do, and you're called to do things that the active guys aren't called to do, like disaster recovery. During COVID, the National Guard, we manned distribution sites for food and water for people that couldn't get anything. We did a lot of the testing sites, the vaccination sites. A lot of those were not just medical personnel from the Guard, but they were folks we pressed into duty. One of the things we do in the Army that we all go through at some point is what we call a combat lifesaver course. So you learn how to give an IV, you learn how to deal, with a pneumothorax wound, those kind of things that happen in combat. So you get advanced first aid skills that can be rapidly turned into, if you're in a pinch, how can I rapidly grow a very rudimentary medical service corps here, okay, that can help a very large population. So we did all those things. And again, there's a lot of ways to be a soldier in the Army, but there's a whole lot more in the National Guard. And I tell folks, if you want to have a regular career, that's great. Do that, okay? If you still want to serve, we've got a way to do that. And my service was like a lot of folks. What I did in the civilian world was wildly different than what I do in the Army. In the civilian world, I do cybersecurity and IT service management now is what I do. I run a company that does that. In the Guard, It was all combat arms. I was armored infantry for all 36, 40 years of it. So again, those medals were really designed about what I'd done in my community. And that's the thing I love most about the Guard is the fact that we do things in the community, not just around the world. I mean, you can see Guard folks running, you'll see military vehicles run on the highways, especially in the summertime when they're going to training and whatnot. Those are Guardsmen. 9 times out of 10, those are Guard. Every now and then you get some reserve folks in there, they're mostly Guardsmen that are in your home state. And if there's a problem there, that's who the governor's going to call upon, because we reinforce law enforcement, we reinforce first responders, whatever the case may be.
Looking back at your career, seeing the good and the bad, what advice would you give to a young person considering the military after high school?
That's a great question. You know, the military is not for everybody for a litany of reasons. I mean, you know, the hardest part probably about joining the military is many times passing a physical. I mean, if you talk to any recruiter, they'll tell you we found great people okay, and we couldn't get them a waiver because of some physical issue that they had. But the benefits of doing those kind of things are tremendous. And what I would tell folks, if you're thinking about it, you know, the military wants the same thing that, you know, every other great organization in America wants. All right, we want highly motivated young people that are smart, proficient, have a high emotional IQ, that they're good around people. I mean, everybody wants those people, right? So it can be competitive, and you know, the Army competes with other organizations out there that want, you know, the best young talent. And we have, you know, as we go through, if you look at the course of time, we'll have certain times when we're really good at getting that talent and we're really bad at getting that talent. And a lot of times when I was teaching ROTC, I was also the recruiter for ROTC. So I talked to a lot of parents. And as a parent myself, you know, parents are going to ask questions: is this dangerous for my child? Is this something I want them doing? So parents are probably the most strong influencer you're going to have of anybody joining the military. After that, you've got coaches, you've got teachers, faculty members, and administrators in schools and whatnot, and other family members, and then friends. Friends are very influential and motivational, those kind of things. But as I went through that, what I've learned in talking to young folks, I've seen a few parallels. First, a lot of the folks that join the military have some kind of a familial connection to that. A father or mother served, somebody, an uncle, an aunt, a grandfather, whatever they've served in the past, and they feel that connection. They've heard those stories, and they say, you know, I want to be a part of that. The second most reason I get, and this is, people might laugh at this, but it's a sense of adventure. You get a lot of this. You know, when I was a young man, okay, think about this. I was there. President Reagan was the president, and we were 10 years out of Vietnam, and the American military was kind of beginning to make a comeback in the early 80s. When I got here at PCHS, it was 1981. So Reagan had just won, and we were at the beginning of that term. By the time I would graduate, he was in the middle of his 8-year term. So a lot of things had changed, and patriotism was very much in vogue in those days, and serving the military was very much. So again, we kind of go through those different times, but a lot of us really kind of sought that adventure out. We saw that. A lot of that was in pop culture. It was a very different time. I mean, in those days, the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. We had boycotted the Summer Olympics. I mean, things that happened well before you guys were born. Those were the world events that were shaping us at the time we kind of lived that history. But that sense of adventure was probably the number 2 reason. The third reason that people think that, and a lot of other outside the military think this is what drives is getting money for college. It certainly does. There's great benefits to being in the military. But I would say it was probably the number 3 thing. I mean, people join for a lot of reasons. And some people join, if you take all those things, they might rack and stack them and rank them different than I would. But there's a lot of reasons to join. And as I've talked to folks about that, you know, I tell them, look, it's a very personal decision. All right. I remember when I was at West Point, I was in my plebe world history class. And it was then Major Mike Matheny. I'll never forget this guy. Because he was the first guy at West Point that told us the truth about something. I was taking it second semester. I was about to finish up my plebe year, and we were talking about ancient warfare. I think we were talking about the Assyrians were the first to ever have cavalry and chariots. We were going through ancient warfare and whatnot. And, you know, he had been a Vietnam veteran. And he said, listen, when you're at the academy, at the end of your sophomore year, you make a decision. If you move on for that, okay, you're committing to the military. If you stop at the end of your sophomore year, you owe nothing in obligation. You can just walk away. So he said, listen, next year you guys make a big decision. You're going to commit to the military. And never forget that, what you're here getting a great education. It's a 5-star education. It's fantastic, but there's a reason for this. All right. And that reason is we expect you, if the time comes, to fight and win the nation's wars. So when I'm talking to a young person and they're telling me they want to join the military or asking about it, at some point, I've always felt compelled to tell them the truth. And that is, you may get money for college. You may find great adventure. You may be doing this to fulfill, a perceived obligation to your family. But the one thing that you have to understand and know in your heart is if the nation calls you to go to war, in that time, okay, you've stood and said, I'm going to go. All right. It's a very, very serious commitment that we ask from an 18-year-old to do. All right. And that's why, I love it when high schools will recognize those young people that have made that decision, because it's a big boy and a big girl decision at a very young part of your life. And they're raising their right hand saying, yeah, pick me, send me, I'll go. So that's what I see.
General Epperly, we appreciate your time with us today, and we want to offer you the opportunity to say anything else to those who are watching that you may want to say. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thanks, John. I'll just a couple things here. I would just tell the students watching that in your high school years, you're in a major transformative part of your life. You don't realize it right now, but you are. A lot of the things you're doing now, okay, are going to set the stage for later life for you. Your individual habits, what you value, your work ethic, all those things are going to drive you in life. You have a wonderful opportunity here at Pulaski County High School. Like I said, I came from a lower middle class family. We weren't rich by any stretch. I made the decision if I didn't get in the Service Academy or get an ROTC scholarship, I was going to enlist, and that would be how I would fund my college kid, but I was going to go in the military regardless. But you have a wonderful opportunity here. I mentioned some of the teachers that I had. The teachers and the staff you have here at PCHS are all extremely interested and vested in your success. Now, obviously, your mom and your dad and your family, they all love you and they want to see you be successful. But your faculty and your staff, your teachers here at PCHSK, nobody's more in your corner than they are. All right. I will tell you, some days they will tell you things you don't want to hear. They'll demand things that you don't want to do. I would tell you to trust in their wisdom. All right, because they walked that road that you're walking right now, and they're here for you. The folks that I have were just fantastic people. From my coach, Wright, my cross country coach for all 4 years, and indoor and outdoor track, and all my teachers that were out there. I've kept in touch with over the years. Suzanne Steele was my English and my debate teacher in 10th and 11th grade. And, when she heard that I got on the West Point debate team and I went to the World Debate Championships as a cadet, she was blown away. She was the one that called the Southwest Times, actually had them write an article about that. So your teachers and your staff here really care about you. All right, they really do. Use that resource, okay, because in these 4 fleeting years, and they will be over before you know it, all right, a lot's going to happen to set you up for your future, all right? Take advantage of that. Don't waste that time. Yes, have fun, okay? You're a teenager. You're going through a wonderful part of life, okay? It's a great part of life, okay? I met my wife at that age. It's a great part of life. But also take the time to invest in yourself. I will tell you, I'll leave it with this, Jalen. The one immutable fact that I've learned, no matter what you do in life, and there's a whole lot of ways to be successful. I chose the military in corporate America. I've got classmates that went into the trades and now own their own businesses. I've got classmates that went into healthcare, became doctors and nurses. They've been successful in all walks of life. But every single one of those paths required hard work and dedication. Every single one. All right. So, when you're being asked to do that work or do it right and do your best, okay, you're not doing that for your teacher. You're not doing that for your mom and dad. You're doing that for you. Okay. So I would just tell you, invest in yourself. All right. And again, learn what I had to learn the hard way from Mr. Duncan at West Point was, you're responsible, and you alone are responsible for your education, your development, and the success that you'll see in life. But you're blessed to be here in America. All right. I've been all around the world. All right. And if I could live in one place, it'd be right here. So that's it. I'll close with, again, go Army, beat Navy.
Again, we want to thank you for joining us today, and we wish you the absolute best in everything you do. Thank you for your service to our country and for setting a fine example for all of our Cougars out there watching.
Thanks, Jalen.
Thank you for watching this episode of Hometown Heroes. Be sure to browse through all of our videos here on PCTV, and be sure to like, subscribe, and share our link with everyone. Thank you for watching, and go Cougars!